Welcome to a special episode of the Good and Basic Podcast, Better and More Complex, where we talk about the projects we do and why we do them.
And boy, do we have a project to talk about today.
Today, in the car with me, we're actually recording from a car and hoping that we can edit out the background noise pretty effectively, is myself, Joseph, and also Joseph.
Hi, Joseph.
Hello to you too, Joseph. We are right now driving through England, driving on the left side of the road, and we haven't crashed yet, and we're hoping that it stays that way. We are in the middle of about a 3-week project tour through the Netherlands and the United Kingdom. We're about halfway through that, which is why we haven't gotten out regular episodes of the podcast, as things have just been a little unpredictable and busy, but we're really glad to be able to record this special episode. We think we've got some pretty interesting things to talk about. What the plan is we're going to go chronologically through a lot of the open-air history museums we've seen, the sites we've visited, and so forth, and then we're going to kind of stitch it all together. So that should be super good. Are you ready, Joseph?
I am. In the pre-show conversation, a lot of what we were talking about kind of centered around the scale of industry or the scale of social organization. And just to give a sense of the topics that we've covered, the Roman Empire and its construction projects. We talked a little bit about pre-factory systems of mass production and also specifically Dutch windmills, because they are fascinating and numerous. So
basically we're going to put windmills, Hadrian's Wall, and plastic recycling in a blender and see what comes out. So the first place we visited in the Netherlands was called, if I can get the pronunciation right, Zanziskans, which is sort of a living history museum a little bit. It's a reproduction of windmills and so on and so forth. There's a cooper shop. There's they show you how they make the wooden clogs. It's really great. If you don't mind, I'm going to lead off on this one real fast, because what struck me first and foremost about Zanziskans was a few things. First of all, how beautiful and natural it was, and how many animals there were surrounding us. There were sheep in the field right next to us. There were ducks wandering around. And then the other connected element was that this was kind of an industrial town a little bit. That windmills they're industrial equipment. And yet they're so separate from everything that we associate with, quote unquote, the Industrial Revolution, right? Separate from giant steel mills, separate from huge smokestacks belching coal smoke into the sky, separate from the coal mines, right? So separate from those, and yet still machinery, still industrial. And then combined with the raw natural beauty of the landscape and how close, crowds of hundreds of people were to ducks and sheep and, and other kinds of more wild wildlife. That was what jumped out at me, and I was like, wow, there's something here that's worth paying attention to. There's something here really interesting, that they've got machinery, they've got industry, but it's not the kind of industrial revolution that we're used to thinking about. So That was what jumped out at me.
It is an interesting thing that in Holland, the way land use works, there are farms and fields basically everywhere. The population is quite concentrated. It's one of the more, in terms of population density, it's like 3 or 4 in the world. I think Singapore beats it, and a few other very small countries, but it does not feel that way when you're there. It feels like a giant spread of farmland with little parks and villages scattered among it, but believe it or not, in this tiny, tiny country, there are almost 17 million people living.
Yeah, and it's really interesting you mentioned that, because Zanziskans is a reproduction of a 17th century town, right?
Late 17th century, early 18th.
But even now, as we were driving through the Netherlands, I had the same sense, that you're describing, that it's a bunch of farmland. Yeah. And with incredible population density. And so, so many of the things that we associate with large cities, right? Bad air, crowded, cramped conditions, and so forth. I didn't have that sense in the Netherlands. And so, again, it was another thing that I noticed, and I was like, wow, this is interesting. I want to pay attention to this, figure out what's going on.
One of the things that really stood out to me while we were there is the fact that the windmills are used to pump out water. About 50% of the Netherlands is technically below sea level, or has since become below sea level due to mining peat for fuel, which causes the land to sink down a little bit. Drainage projects have also caused the land to settle down a little bit. And you end up with massive projects that are designed to reclaim land. These are very old. Large portions of Amsterdam required dikes already and had massive drainage projects by the 13th century. And so, I mean, it's a long part of the history to be draining water. And we had a chance to try doing that with a hand-powered Archimedes screw. You can imagine doing it with buckets. It works on a boat, not so much
Draining
in
an
the country.
ocean with a bucket? Thanks, no thanks.
On a scale of 1 to nope. That's pretty high on my list. I can imagine that working with a boat, bailing buckets, but even then a pump is helpful. But these windmills have Archimedes screws attached, some of them. Some of them are pumping mills, some of them make oil, some of them are used in flax preparation, some of them are used for grinding grain. There's a lot of things that you can use all that power from a windmill for. And really, they've developed a bunch of micro factories. But for pumping water, you've got all these stations. And it seems like a project everyone has buy-in on that's kind of unifying, but also distributed in that it's a bunch of individual people, a bunch of mill owners pumping their section of the wall.
Yeah, exactly. And that was the other thing that struck me is that distributed element, right? The fact that you have a lot of small proprietors, right? There's no sort of central command and control structure.
Though there is now.
And it's a little different now. I'm talking about the windmills, right?
Sure.
That it's incredibly distributed outwards, right? And each one of those windmills can also function independently of all the other windmills. I'm assuming was my impression, right?
Yeah.
So that if one does break down, you have all the other windmills going. It was so interesting to see that scale of production and to see machinery operate on the local level of small proprietors. That was really cool.
On that note, I want to talk a little bit about the weaving shop. So we were at Zanzikar's. There was a weaver's cottage, which was a really interesting dwelling because it had 2 separate apartments in it for 2 families, and then a large workshop in the back. So it's kind of like you live where you work, or rather work came home with you. Depends on how cynical you are, I guess. But, there were regions in the Netherlands that were famous for producing sailcloth from hemp.
Even so much that it became a notable export.
Large portion of the world's supply. I mean, here you have specialization in the economy, you have high production, you have huge emphasis within weaving villages that sprung up or converted over to become weaving villages. But this is in the days before steam power. I mean, they're still operating on traditional looms, but there's still massive craft specialization, and a lot of the things that we tend to associate with the Industrial Revolution are present long before it. Similar with the windmills that are producing things other than pumping water. One that we saw was producing linseed oil from the flax plant. It produces little seeds, linseed seeds, and that makes a good paint and or varnish because it dries. It's unusual for that. And, there's no steam engine here, but it does have the feeling of being a large industrial machine.
Since you mentioned the weaving, I can't help but wonder, tomorrow we're hoping to stop at Cromford Mills, which is the origin of the factory system, the site of the origin of the factory system. It's a textile mill, right? And so now I'm imagining that the weaver shops in Zanzikar's did not have mechanized looms.
No.
But I can't help but wonder now, what if you made a mechanized loom and put it in one home in Holland, powered by a windmill?
Yeah.
And that's a whole different branch that technology and social organization could have gone, that it didn't.
Yes.
And I kind of wish it had gone that way, right? Smaller, more appropriate technology. And now I'm curious, could we get that to work? Could you on your city block have 1 or 2 people who own a textile mill who do all of the weaving for that city block?
Yeah. Kind of similar to Etsy, kind of a distributed network of lots of individual people making stuff in their basement. The revival of cottage industry, or something that's
windmill industry,
slightly upgraded from cottage industry, but still not quite as alienating as concentrated factories.
I guess a lot of times when we say cottage industry, we especially mean handmade crafts.
Yes.
Right. And the windmills break that mold because it's mechanized.
Yes. Mechanized, efficient, but a moderate scale. We're not going to say high scale, not low scale, but somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, sort of overarching a lot of this is the idea that, the Industrial Revolution has given us some amazing things, right? We would not be able to be broadcasting this podcast to you right now, recording it now and broadcasting it later, if it were not for the Industrial Revolution.
No.
And yet, so many of the side effects of the Industrial Revolution, in terms of, say, for example, social organization, pollution, seem to have been so destructive, so dehumanizing, and so demeaning, right?
Yeah.
And so the question is kind of, okay, can we separate the baby from the bathwater? And so we're looking at Zanziskans and the open-looped museum and precious plastic that we're going to talk about in a second as, okay, maybe we can figure out the difference between the baby and the bathwater, sort these out, and make a better kind of social and industrial organization.
Absolutely. It's you mentioned the textile mill, Cromford Mills. We haven't been there yet, but it is on the itinerary, and it's an important place because it was positioned where it was next to the Peak District. Lake District? Peak District? My English geography is unfortunately less good than I would like it to be. But it was situated in an area where it had access to water power. This is a factory, the original origin of the factory system with a lot of its ills. I mean, Mr. Arkwright had all of his factory workers living in a compound on site and sing songs in his praises, which, speaks something to his ego. But it was not a steam-powered factory. The original invention for spinning cotton thread that he devised was called a water frame because it operated on water power. And they had massive water wheels that would power shafts through the factory, which then off of belts ran the individual machines, running thousands of threads at a time. In weaving in particular, for hundreds of years, for thousands of years, spinning had always been the bottleneck. It took about 6 spinners to keep one weaver busy. And so there wasn't a whole lot of pressure to automate looms and make them higher tech until the thread was higher tech. By that point, concentrated factories were the norm, and what you were describing of a wind-powered mill didn't really happen.
Yeah, this sounds like a really good time to pivot to precious plastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is, let's call it the modern equivalent of a windmill, except for it's not a windmill, it's a plastic recycling ecosystem, let's say. So do you want to talk about that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So the Precious Plastic Project is a project done by the designer Dave Hawkins in the Netherlands, and it centers around the problem of plastic pollution. Plastic is eternal, and it lasts for basically forever in the ground, which is really cool. It doesn't biodegrade, which is also awesome.
Half blessing, half curse.
Half blessing, half curse. The trouble is, a lot of the things that we make out of plastic are not intended to be eternal. Your water bottle, for instance, is not something that needs to be eternal. But it is, and so it turns into waste, and then that waste breaks down a little bit over time through sunlight and turns into microplastics and causes all kinds of problems. And Dave Hawkins wanted to find a solution to this problem, so for a school project, he created a suite of devices which allowed him to recycle small amounts of plastic at home. These include a shredder for breaking down bottles and larger pieces of plastics into workable sized fragments and flakes, a extruder which makes a long strand of molten plastic, and a injection mold that operates off of hand pressure. And these tools are fascinating. He published all the plans online, and a number of makerspaces have built this suite of tools to try tackling the problem of plastic waste in a distributed fashion, taking personal responsibility for some amount of it. But now he's working on version 4 of the suite, and he's trying to upgrade the machines to the point where they are semi-industrial and somewhat more specialized, so you can have a workshop making just plastic flakes, working on the sorting and washing and grinding, and another workshop separately using these flakes to make new items which can take advantage of that semi-eternal quality of plastics. So the project is fascinating. The thing that I like the most about it is the fact that it's not a top-down collective solution. It's a distributed solution. It's something that says, I am personally taking responsibility for my patch of the garden, and I'm going to make a difference personally. and directly, rather than indirectly by means of politics or anything else.
Yeah, so we were, it's interesting. I was just thinking as you were speaking, we went down and toured his facility down in Eindhoven, and it's in a warehouse that the city is letting them use for free. And I was just thinking, it was kind of like walking through an old-time barn. It's everything is made of steel and concrete, right? But it's sort of the same principle. It's like, okay, I need a big building to do kind of my small-scale industry stuff, right? So I think that's exactly right. And you mentioned the grinder. We actually have the pieces for the grinder, do we not? We're hoping to
Yes,
to make the plastic grinder and then an extruder.
absolutely.
So we are
Personally invested in the project, so to
yeah,
speak.
yeah. Well, and it's the kind of thing, right? Like, I can't go clean up the Exxon Valdez oil spill, right? But I certainly can recycle my own plastic if I have a grinder or an extruder, and if I have some of these, relatively small and inexpensive tools. This is actually a thing that I could do.
Especially since we like to make things, it takes it out of the range of being a problem, and suddenly, I mean, the cool thing about the Precious Plastic Project, if it becomes, if these next wave of machines increase the efficiency a little bit, is that it's a small business, which means you could make not only a difference in your community recycling plastic, but you could turn it into your full-time income. And that's cool. A bunch of small businesses. I like small businesses. That seems to be an important, useful, beneficial thing. In addition to that, it's a personal solving of a contribution to solving the problem of plastic waste. And in addition to that, it's creative work, which is a valuable and increasingly somewhat rare thing. This is the kind of thing that people go home to work in a workshop, a wood shop, and make, cabinets for fun.
Yeah.
But it's not something that you can typically make your livelihood at. And this, it's just interesting.
It might be.
Yeah.
Yeah. It really is making lemons out of, other way around, making lemonade out of lemons.
If you can make lemons out of lemonade, I will be very impressed.
You could. I will get back to you on that one.
Speaking of making
I think I'm going to need some time.
Or lemonade out of lemons. I want to talk just a little bit about our luggage situation.
Oh, this should. Well, okay, yeah. Let's go ahead.
It's a large pivot from social organization and how to save the world, but it has been.
Actually, I have a connection. So go ahead and briefly describe it. I know what I want to say about it.
Present problem being this: we missed one of our key flights in order to get here to this work trip, and as a result of missing that flight, our baggage got confused, or rather the handlers who dealt with the baggage got confused, and long story short, we do not have our checked baggage. Now, if you are ever traveling, a couple of recommendations: make sure that you have at least one change of clothes in your carry-on. That would have been nice, and also anything that you absolutely have to have, keep in the carry-on.
Fortunately, we have the camera and all that equipment. Well, and obviously we're recording the podcast, so the projects are proceeding unabated. But it was certainly not pleasant.
No,
it was certainly not pleasant. Do you mind if I say what I wanted to say about social organization?
Precisely.
So this was kind of interesting. I was just thinking about it. So right now there are people who I've never met who are tracing my luggage across multiple continents, probably across a whole ocean, and that's amazing to me. Joseph and I think a little more Joseph, if not, you can correct me, are somewhat cynical about the level of social organization that we've reached and the type of social organization that we have.
Well, I'm not sure if I'm cynical.
Suspicious?
That's probably a better word.
Suspicious. Joseph says suspicious. I think. Well, we'll leave that be. Suspicious. This is one of those times that I sit back and I think, this is an incredible achievement, right? Like, there are people who I have never met who are helping me. And that's incredible. And that really is something that, the modern world has given us that, is certainly, if you think the modern world is a cloud, that's an undeniable silver lining.
Yeah. It's a remarkable thing. Apparently, a lot of the baggage companies now use a centralized system where they share information about where a particular bag is. And so we were able to show the baggage claim ticket, they scan it, and then They're able to identify where it was last scanned in any airport in the world, more or less.
A little bit less in our case so far.
In our case so far, it's
but
been
hopefully
mostly
more
less.
soon.
Yes, and then they're able to find the bag, get it on the appropriate airplane, and get it to where it needs to be, including delivering it, oddly enough, to the place where you're staying, which, that's quite the perk.
Yeah.
To be able to say, oh, I lost my luggage in San Francisco, and it's going to be delivered to me at the campsite in Sherwood Forest.
It probably won't, but delivered at some point.
Hypothetically.
So
yes.
This will also be kind of interesting. We are camping out in Sherwood Forest tonight, which is so cool. So cool.
Unfortunately, the sleeping bags and hammocks were in the checked baggage.
So what we have is wool blankets that we bought up in Scotland, and so we are really going to be doing the whole Robin Hood thing. Hopefully we'll film a video or two there. It looks like it's just going to be an amazing experience, so I hope that we have some cool stuff to say about it to put on the channel. Are we ready to pivot to the Romans?
I think so.
Okay, Romans, let's stitch it in. Boom, go.
Romans. We visited Hadrian's Wall and also the archaeological site at Vindolanda, which is a much larger fort combined with a town that kind of grew up around the outside of it. And we also got to walk a mile or so of the wall, which was incredible. Apparently, along all 83 some odd miles of the wall, those are modern miles, in Roman times it was something like 98. They have a castle, or rather a gate, that's manned by about 16 men every mile, whether it's needed or not. And that level of organization in the wall itself, 15 feet high on average, is incredible.
So we were talking about this a little bit in the pre-conversation okay, you're going to build an 83-mile wall, you're going to build it 15 feet high, and you're going to build it all out of, I would say, cantaloupe-sized stones, roughly, right? Squared, but cantaloupe-sized more or less. So that's a lot of rocks, first of all. You need to quarry the rocks, you may need to face the rocks. You need to carry the rocks to the place where you want the wall. You need to set all the rocks on top of each other. And you need to do that 15 feet high, and you need to do that for 83 miles. So,
that's the kind of thing that, for one thing, you wouldn't do yourself.
You cannot do yourself.
Or, empire-sized project.
Mm-hmm.
And for another thing, it's the kind of thing that not only would you not do it yourself, you cannot do it yourself.
Yeah.
And so it requires organization. You need the engineers and the surveyors to figure out the best place to put the wall. You need the politicians to decide that you need the wall in the first place, and then you need many, many, many soldiers / contractors to be building the wall.
Yeah. Actually, there's a couple interesting historical notes about the wall that I think you'll all find very interesting. You would think that a wall is to repel invasions, and actually, I didn't know this before we went there. It turns out that Hadrian's Wall was probably not for repelling invasions, at least not very often. If you think you have an 83-mile long wall and it's 15 feet high, that is in fact the kind of wall that you can climb over. And there are forts every mile, and there are some other little cupola outposts. But it's still, a little bit difficult to, to guard every mile all the time.
Perfectly.
Yeah, you can't really do that. So people, the Picts who live on the northern side of the border, they are going to sneak through from time to time. And apparently the idea here is, well, yes, they're going to sneak through, but then they're going to try to rustle cattle, and you try getting cattle over a 15-foot high stone wall.
Right. It turned out to be mostly a trade barrier, similar to like a customs office, where by controlling the borders, all of these gates every mile, they call them mile castles. In effect, they turn out to be more like a customs official.
It's a castle-ish.
A castle-ish. It's
but
got a gate in one side, gate in the other, and then you travel straight through if you've paid the fees, if you've paid the taxes and customs on whatever it is that you've purchased on the other side. And you'll say, oh yes, this is my cow, which I bought. And, you have to get past 16 guards at each one of these mile castles in order to get through. So the wall, for one thing, was a whole lot more permeable than maybe we first suspected. But
yeah, it's not like this, keep the nasty Picts out, stop them from invading, although it sort of is that too, for sure, right? It's also something more like, hey, We just need to be able to control what comes in and what comes out of all this lovely territory in the south end of Great Britain that we've conquered.
Right.
So that's pretty interesting. It's something I didn't know. Another thing I think about in terms of that wall is that if you think about it in terms of a hard barrier, which it was not, if you think about it as in terms of a hard militaristic barrier, then you also say, okay, well, this is the line of Roman influence. Roman influence doesn't go any further than this, right? When the truth is, it's actually a very semi-permeable barrier. There's a lot of trade goods that are moving up and down, through this wall, right? Like you said, it's a customs point at an airport. It's not a
and
it's not the walls of Minas Tirith.
There are people presumably commuting more or less from one side of the wall to the other daily.
That's an incredible thought.
Yeah, commuting through Hadrian's Wall.
Daily, weekly, monthly, sometime.
Yeah.
It's a really cool thing to think about.
I think the connection there was the level of organization. Oh, that's one thing. At Vindolanda, there are a lot of fragments of pottery, massive amounts of goods taken from the Roman site. They have archaeology going on continuously. And we had the special privilege of not only touring there with Lloyd of Lindybeige, but also of handling some, Roman pottery shards. Actual Roman pottery shards. That
not replicas, little bits that have been pulled out of the ground.
There's a particular red kind of pottery.
Just one second. I want to interject one thing that our audience may not be familiar with, is the fact that you might think, oh, but they let you touch that pottery? That's ancient. You might hurt it. It's this precious relic. And it actually turns out, if you didn't know this, it's kind of interesting that in the ancient world there is pottery everywhere. It's actually quite durable, right? You might suspect that because, like everything else, it's made of dirt. And so it's quite durable over time, and it's a thing you use a lot. You use it for your lamps, you use it for all sorts of cooking pots, you use it to store things. And so, there's just a lot of it lying around all over the place. Huge amounts. In fact, the Samian ware.
The Samian ware is a red style of pottery which comes from a particular region in France and is found everywhere in the Roman Empire. Now, just let that sink in. They considered it so valuable. It's supposedly better, finer. It makes a different sound when you clink it on your teeth. And
particularly good clay in that region of Gaul, I think.
Yes, good clay in that particular region of Gaul. There's a number of workshops in this area that are exporting pottery. Now, think for once about how heavy a crate of pottery would be. That's not light. Now, you're transporting that without the benefit of gasoline, which means sail power in ships or pulled by some animal on a cart. And then it gets shipped all around the Mediterranean and as far north as the frontiers of Scotland. That's incredible to me. Also, another interesting thing about the Samian ware is that it's made in molds. So it's made in factories and then exported all over the empire, over an area the size of the United States and then a little larger.
Yeah. And this is a kind of a trope about the ancient world, is that, you never go far from where you're born. It's such a small, constricted world. And, the more I learn about the ancient world, the more I'm surprised about how extensive communication and trade networks were.
Yes.
The more I'm surprised about how far people were traveling.
Particularly under the Roman Empire. For one thing, large, standardized, massive road systems, aqueducts, all that stuff. So, and for another thing...
The roads particularly.
Yes.
And the Roman soldiers are engineers, so they're building these all the time, wherever they go.
And the single system of law means that it's fairly easy to travel, say, with a Roman passport anywhere within the empire. So that means, trade becomes safer, easier, faster, more convenient generally.
Uh-huh.
That level of connectivity is something that we associate more with a very, very modern way of living.
And yet, this is a testament that it can occur in quote-unquote pre-modern, less modern, let's say,
in no electricity,
systems
no
of
engines.
Organization. Yeah.
Yes.
Right, that there are systems of social organization that permit immense mobility and travel that don't require, so many things that are consequences of the Industrial Revolution, like steam, coal, oil-powered shipping, diesel shipping, airplanes, so on and so forth. It's not just the crafts and goods either. One of the things that I saw at the museum was there's a skeleton of a small child that they found at Vindeland at the excavation site. About 10 years old. They're not sure if it's a boy or a girl because the bone markers don't appear until puberty. But by doing chemical analysis on the teeth of this skeleton, they discovered that this little 10-year-old child was born in the Mediterranean, right? Not in Great Britain. They're born in the Mediterranean, and they moved to Great Britain when they were 7 years old. So at somewhere between, I can't remember the date of the skeleton, it's somewhere between 53 AD roughly and about 400 AD, round numbers. You have a 7-year-old child who comes from the Mediterranean, and they pick up and move all the way to Great Britain. Right? It's not just trade goods, it's also people, right? There's incredible mobility there.
And the story there, you can imagine being something like, Dad got a new post at this frontier town, we have to move.
Yeah.
And so you pack up your family and move that far.
Man, if you thought making new friends when you moved elementary schools when you were a child is hard, like think about moving across a couple of continents and then trying to make friends with all the British tribes, right?
Yeah.
Lots of Romans and auxiliary allies and so forth.
But even the Roman troops weren't all from the same place.
Yeah,
so
auxiliaries and allies. So
Scythians and all these people speaking vulgar Latin as a way of getting along, because that's not the language at home. But they have this new lingua franca in vulgar Latin.
Yeah.
One thing I'd like to kind of round us off with is, we talked a little bit about how social organization in the Romans allowed them to do things that we consider to be very modern.
Yeah.
It's impressive and exciting. We've seen things about the windmills, which is kind of this intermediate level of technology, semi-industrial, but not quite what we expect. It would be interesting to point out a few things that are really good about the modern day that we like, and a few things that are really good about the back then that we want to integrate, shall we say.
Is this the game that we're playing right now?
I think this is the game.
Okay, am I going first or you go first?
You go first.
Okay, I'll go first. So, couple things that I like from the modern world, couple things that I like from the ancient world. Is that
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, I can pick out one of each really quickly. Something that I like from the modern world, electricity. That not even a hard choice. Not even a hard choice. Electricity has done so many incredible things for us. Right, not least, probably the most significant one is frankly electronics.
Yeah.
Lighting at night you can do without electricity, but electronics, computing devices, mechanical computers are just so much, bigger, right? And the fact that we make silicon chips and run electrical currents through them, godsend. It's an absolute godsend.
Absolutely.
Hook me up a windmill with a dynamo. That's what I say. So there you go. As far as the ancient world, this is something that I thought of in Zanzi's Khans, which is, I want to be surrounded by nature, including animals, right? I want to have ducks waddling next to me just a few feet away, and I want to eat a few of those ducks, right? I don't really want to be a vegetarian. I don't think, at least not right now. I want to eat a duck, but I also want to be there. I want there to be lots of ducks around me that I'm not eating.
I kind of like the idea of having...
there's one thing of each.
Yeah, the distance from duck to table to be as short as possible.
Yeah, for me, I want also the distance from me to the duck, the live duck, not the one I eat, to be as short as possible.
Right, to feel connected and integrated with the natural setting.
Yes, yeah, so there's one thing of each. I'll see if I can think of a couple more, but that sounds like let me see if I can think of one or two more. Transportation is one that I kind of think I really want from the modern world, right? Flying over the Atlantic Ocean in 14 hours, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. One other thing from the ancient world. Oh, metalworking also from the modern world, right? A lot of industrial steel processing and stuff like that. That's maybe something I'd put on there. Something else from the ancient world. Just a little bit more hand construction. I'm not one of those people who wants to do everything by hand, but I would like to do just a little bit more by hand. So there's a couple things for me. There we go. Your turn.
Gasoline. I really like being able to travel by car and airplane. Those two things are extremely handy. But one thing from the ancient world that I'd like is, some things like Samian traveled massive distances in order to get to the kitchens of homes far, far away. But most of your pots and pans, most of your food would be quite local. And I like that. I don't mind. In fact, I actually really like, being able to get some things from far away. But where something could be made at home, I'd like most of it to be made very near to home. So smaller, more emphasis placed on regional stuff, but with some long-distance stuff brought with good old cars and airplanes, because I'm a fan of both. Just, I don't want to need them quite as often.
Yeah, very fair. Okay, and something from... Wait, did you do one of each?
I think I did.
Sorry, I zoned out for a second because I'm helping you
Gasoline and somewhat more local economies.
All right, hey, that's a great list. I think probably a really super good way to round off the podcast. So, to give you a little bit of teaser of what's coming up, we're sleeping in Sherwood Forest tonight, just like Robin Hood. Should be super fun. Well, by fun, I mean it's going to be 45 degrees and we're going to be freezing, so hopefully we survive. Tomorrow, let's see. Well, we've just got a lot of stuff. You'll have to watch the YouTube channel and see for more special podcast episodes. Cromford Mills, Black Country Living History Museum, some other stuff in London. Just too much. Just check back. So
thank you so much for listening. And
yeah, we really appreciate you listening. If you are not subscribed, we encourage you to subscribe and to hit the like button to help support us. And also in the YouTube description, this is the second time that I put it at the end of the podcast. In the YouTube description, you can find an audio-only version of the podcast so that you don't have to stream it over YouTube, because sometimes that's a little bit inconvenient. So thank you very much for listening, and we'll be back soon.
Godspeed and good luck.